Hello and welcome to my video on achievement gap. Today we're going to be discussing what achievement gap is, some potential reasons as to why it happens, and some potential solutions on how we can close the gap. So let's go ahead and begin and talk about what is achievement gap. Basically, achievement gap is that disparity between high performers and low performers. The formal definition is or refers to the disparity of achievement between various students in groups. These groups can include, but are not limited to, gender, race, socioeconomic status, and culture. So again, we're talking about those high performing students, that group of students, and that low performing group of students. What are the similarities? What are the differences? And how can we close that gap to make sure that all students feel as though they are learning on a level playing field? I think it is important to note that this is something that I feel very passionately about, and this is something that needs to be addressed early on in the educational career, so that way that disparity doesn't need to grow any bigger. I feel as children grow older, that disparity can grow larger if we don't address it as soon as possible. So I'm going to first talk about some of the reasons I feel that the achievement gap exists, and then I'm going to talk about some potential solutions. I think it's hard to talk about solutions if we don't talk about the reasons for the problem. So very briefly, I'm just going to discuss the biggest reason I feel that the achievement gap exists is because of socioeconomic status and poverty. That's to put it very simply. There are multiple reasons, there's multiple factors into it, but I think that that's one major one that is a cause for the achievement gap. So socioeconomic status can affect a child's ability to learn, as it can affect their access to quality education as opposed to their counterparts. So in order to illustrate that point, I want to give an example of two students walking through, let's call them first graders, walking through their door on the first day of school. They both walk in, and let's say student A comes well fed, adequately dressed for the weather, well rested, comes with a parent to walk them in and wish them a good day. Student B comes in not fed, not adequately rested, does not have a parent there to guide them to the class. Not that that's 100% necessary, but on the first day of school, I think that that's something that's important, especially for a little person. And those are the things that start that gap already, in my opinion. I think that when students walk in the door, I think they walk in at the same, and then that drift and that gap begins to happen. I think that children that are hungry or tired tend to be more prone to disruptive behaviors or disruption in their own learning if they don't have disruptions in classroom settings. They will have a harder time focusing. They will have a harder time learning in general. So some solutions I wanted to discuss are going to be regarding some social and economic reform. And so the first thing I suggest is more resources for teachers to deepen their understanding about the different learners and how this can affect the achievement gap. So that's very vague. What I mean by this is offering teachers more resources to learn about their students' individual needs. And this is going to need to happen often, and it's going to need to happen every year. General professional development days are awesome, but they're never going to be addressing those unique students that we will encounter each year. And so I think it's important to allow teachers to have these resources, to allow teachers to have this time to learn about their students prior to school even starting, so that way they know they can meet those needs of those those students rather. So more resources for teachers, which means more money. We need to, as educators, motivate and engage our learners through a challenging curriculum with respect and dignity for each student. So what I mean by that is we need to keep that curriculum challenging and also be respectful of the different learning differences in our classroom. So I think when we make the curriculum easier, especially when students start to get older, they start to notice that they're getting a different curriculum than their counterparts. And I think that can be discouraging. And I think it's important to challenge our students in a way that's respectful. So how can we teach to that child's needs, to that child's learning style, to the different learning styles? I know it's complex, it's not simple, but again, this is where it comes back to those teacher resources and giving those teachers more resources in order to include all those different learning styles, all those different children that come from different walks of life. So I think that's important. I think we need to ensure that children have a safe, or students, children and students have a safe and healthy outlet or counselor to go to if they are having trouble with their own behavior at home or at school. And I want to kind of throw in my theme for this class, which is autism. Children with autism especially will have, or are more likely to have, behaviors that disrupt their own learning or disrupt their peers' learning. And I think it's important that they have an outlet to go to. I think it's important for teachers to have an outlet, for teachers to have a resource to help them support these students and their needs and their different behaviors. I think it's important for teachers to be informed on the triggers for these behaviors or outbursts or whatever the behavior is. They're going to have students, they're going to come across students that are all different every year. It's never going to be the same. Not every student is the same. Not every class is the same, and not every child with autism is the same. They're all different, and it's important that we as educators know that it's very necessary for us to keep learning and to keep using as many resources as we possibly can in order to support the learners in our classroom. Lastly, it's important to monitor progress with the student and the family, the school teachers and their medical team, especially children with autism or children that have occupational therapists or speech therapists. It's important to make sure we utilize those IEP plans, those 504 plans, or any behavior plans necessary to help ensure that these students are supported. Lastly, I want to make sure that in support of children with autism, that it is mandated that all ABA clinics accept Medicaid patients to ensure finding treatments for autism and access to behavioral services and making it equal. Not all ABA clinics accept Medicaid or accept low-income patients due to insurance reasons, and I think that that's not good enough. I think that all ABA clinics and their authorization teams need to work with Medicaid and accept those patients, because what this does is it limits low-income families with children that have autism, and it either puts them on wait lists or gives them services that may not be convenient for the family, in that the location may be too far, or it may be something that's just, they're limited in their choice. I think that just like a primary care provider, we need to have those choices. We need to make sure that these families feel comfortable sending their children to these therapy services. So with that, these therapy services are important in closing the achievement gap because they prepare students with autism for school settings. They prepare them with coping mechanisms for whatever triggers their behaviors that may be deemed as disruptive in a classroom setting. So this is why I feel it's so important to make sure Medicaid is accepted at all ABA clinics in order to ensure that children with autism are getting the especially low income, are getting the therapy services that they need in order to level that playing field when they start school. So this is important to me because I think that children of all abilities and children from all walks of life deserve an education, and they deserve to feel welcome in that education. And I want them to have, it's important for me that they maintain that positive relationship with education, so that way they can go on and feel successful with every grade level that they complete. And some challenges that I think I'm going to face is pushback from all around. So pushback from schools, pushback from parents, pushback from the students themselves, not wanting to participate, not wanting to do that extra work necessary in order to close that achievement gap. Without this work, though, I think it makes it extremely hard to close that achievement gap. So the work is very necessary. And while we may get pushback, I think it's important to keep educating the importance of these resources and make them available, or as available as we can as educators, to our families, to our students, and to these children that deserve a education. So those are my points. Those are my reasons. I apologize for this going over. But that's it. And that's all I have to say on the achievement gap. So thank you so much for listening. And I apologize this went over a little.